So today, because I'm at my parents' house, I didn't have all the Tipitaka. I thought I did. I thought I had the Majjhima, the Anguttara. I was actually thinking to go back to the Anguttara, maybe go over what we did last week and see what else we can bring out of that sutta. If that's a popular idea, we can do it in a subsequent session. But what I did have is in the Buddha's words, and this is another anthology. So these are real suttas under certain themes. And I found one that I like very much from the Anguttara Nikaya. Very, very handy suttas because they're not too long, so we can probably get through them in a single session. And this is from the Anguttara 6, number 10. And I think it's called Mahanama, or it might be called the 6 Recollections. In this book, it's called the 6 Recollections. If you have this book, it's on page 279. If not, don't worry at all. I'll read the whole thing out as we did last week, and then we can have some discussion around it. So the purpose of these discussion groups are just that. They are to engage us, hopefully, with the teachings of the Buddha and find out ways that they can apply to our lives, maybe areas that they might not apply to our lives, or that we might struggle to find ways to apply. But the idea is that we can really make it very practical and hear from one another. So it's not too teacher-centric, but we can learn from the wisdom that's in the group, which is really quite impressive. I often feel these sessions are very nourishing for my practice because I get to hear from you. So there's a slight incentive there for me to do it this way, but also for your sakes as well, that you get to share something together about the Dhamma and about your lives. So I will start by reading this sutta. It's about 2.5 pages. So does that sound okay? Does that sound like we need to pause halfway, or is 2.5 pages? You've all got long attention spans, hopefully. Okay. And it's, again, the 6 recollections. So there will be 6 different practices contained here. So here we go. On one occasion, the Blessed One was dwelling at Kapilavatthu in the Banyan Tree Monastery. Then Mahanama the Sakyan approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side and said, "Venerable Sir, in what way does a noble disciple often dwell when they've arrived at the fruit and understood the teaching?" So this is about the noble disciple, somebody who's seen the Four Noble Truths and who's understood the teaching of non-self. What do? Do they just, slack off? They've done what they have to do, or are they mindful 24 hours? Exactly how do they spend their time? When Mahanama, a noble disciple, has arrived at the fruit and understood the teaching, they often dwell in such a way as this. Here, a noble disciple recollects the Tathagata thus. That's the Buddha himself. The Blessed One is an Arahant, perfectly enlightened, accomplished in true knowledge and conduct, fortunate, knower of the world, unsurpassed leader of persons to be tamed, teacher of devas and humans, the enlightened one, the Blessed One. When a noble disciple recollects the Tathagata thus, on that occasion their mind is not obsessed by lust, hatred, or delusion. Their mind is straight, with the Tathagata as its object. A noble disciple whose mind is straight gains the inspiration of the meaning, the inspiration of the Dhamma, gains gladness connected with the Dhamma. When their gladdened rapture arises, for one uplifted by rapture, the body becomes calm. One calm in body feels happy. For one who's happy, the mind becomes stilled. So I'm changing the translation from concentrated here to stilled. You could also say it becomes one-pointed or unified. It becomes serene, but it is talking about deep samadhi. This is called a noble disciple who dwells evenly amid an uneven population, who dwells without affliction amid an afflicted population, and who has entered upon the stream of the Dhamma and develops recollection of the Buddha. So this is what we call Buddhanusati, recollection of the Buddha. Further, Mahanama, a noble disciple recollects the Dhamma thus. The Dhamma is well expounded by the Blessed One, directly visible, immediate, inviting one to come and see, worthy of application, to be personally experienced by the wise. When a noble disciple recollects the Dhamma thus, on that occasion their mind is not obsessed by lust, hatred, or delusion. Their mind is straight with the Dhamma as its object. And then it has ... but I would like to fill in the dots because this is really important. It's a beautiful sequence that can happen from bringing up the wholesome, bringing up the joy, all the way to deep meditation. So a noble disciple whose mind is straight with the Dhamma as its object gains inspiration in the meaning, the inspiration of the Dhamma, gains gladness connected with the Dhamma. And when they're gladdened, rapture arises. For one uplifted by rapture, the body becomes calm. One calm in body feels happy. For one who is happy, the mind becomes stilled. This is called a noble disciple who dwells evenly amid an uneven population, who dwells without affliction amid an afflicted population, and who has entered upon the stream of Dhamma and develops recollection of the Dhamma. Further, Mahanama, so this is number 3, a noble disciple recollects the Sangha thus. The Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is practicing the good way, practicing the straight way, practicing the true way, practicing the proper way. That is, the 4 pairs of persons, the 8 types of individuals. This Sangha of the Blessed One's disciples is worthy of gifts, worthy of hospitality, worthy of offerings, worthy of reverential salutation. The word is actually Anjali, which means the 2 hands folded together, which is customary in Buddhist countries, to express respect towards the monastic Sangha usually. And the unsurpassed field of merit for the world. When a noble disciple recollects the Sangha thus, on that occasion their mind is not obsessed by lust, hatred, or delusion. Their mind is straight with the Sangha as its object. Okay, I'll do the ... dots one more time. A noble disciple whose mind is straight gains inspiration of the meaning, the inspiration of the Dhamma, gains gladness connected with the Dhamma. When they're gladdened, rapture arises. For one uplifted by rapture, the body becomes calm. For one calm in body feels happy. For one who is happy, the mind becomes still. This is called the noble disciple who dwells evenly amid an uneven population, who dwells without affliction amid an afflicted population, who has entered upon the stream of Dhamma and develops the recollection of the Sangha. So number 4. Further, Mahanama, a noble disciple recollects their own moral discipline thus. I possess the moral virtues dear to the noble ones, unbroken, untorn, unblemished, unmottled, freeing, praised by the wise, ungrasped and leading to stillness, again to deep samadhi. When a noble disciple recollects their own moral discipline thus, on that occasion their mind is not obsessed by lust, hatred, or delusion. Their mind is straight with virtue as its object. And again, that whole chain of causal events unfolds from here. So from that gladness in the meaning and the Dhamma itself, the meaning of the Dhamma and the Dhamma, one is gladdened, one feels, what is it next? tranquility, and then, yes, tranquility, and then happiness, and then stillness. This is called a noble disciple who dwells evenly amid an uneven population, who dwells without affliction amid an afflicted population, who has entered upon the stream of Dhamma and develops recollection of moral discipline or moral conduct. So number 5. Further, Mahanama, a noble disciple recollects their own generosity thus. It is a gain for me, it is well gained by me, that in a population obsessed by the stain of stinginess, I dwell at home with a mind devoid of the stain of stinginess, freely generous, open-handed, delighting in relinquishment, one devoted to charity, delighting in giving and sharing. When a noble disciple recollects their own generosity thus, on that occasion their mind is not obsessed by lust, hatred, or delusion. Their mind is straight with generosity as its object. And the whole sequence follows. This is called a noble disciple who dwells evenly amid an uneven population, dwells without affliction amid an afflicted population, and who has entered upon the stream of Dhamma and develops recollection of generosity. So number 6, the last one. Further, Mahanama, a noble disciple develops the recollection of the devas thus. There are devas in the various heavenly realms. There is found in me such faith, moral discipline, learning, generosity, and wisdom as those devas possessed, because of which, when they passed away from this world, they were reborn there. When a noble disciple recollects their own faith, moral discipline, learning, generosity, and wisdom, as well as those of the devas, on that occasion their mind is not obsessed by lust, hatred, or delusion. Their mind is straight with the devas as its object. I'm going to fill in the dots one more time. A noble disciple whose mind is straight gains the inspiration of the meaning, the inspiration of the Dhamma, gains gladness connected with the Dhamma. When they're gladdened, rapture arises. For one uplifted by rapture, the body becomes calm. One calm in body feels happy. For one who is happy, the mind becomes stilled. This is called a noble disciple who dwells evenly amid an uneven population, who dwells without affliction amid an afflicted population, who has entered upon the stream of the Dhamma and develops recollection of the devas. A noble disciple, Mahanama, who's arrived at the fruit and understood the teaching, often dwells in just this way. So that is the Sutta, Anguttara 6, number 10. And I think that, again, this is a very beautiful sutta that can bring gladness and happiness just by listening, I hope. Because you may have noticed that when you do think about the Buddha, it's very difficult to have lust, isn't it? When you're thinking about the Buddha, or to have hatred, or to have as much delusion, because at that moment you're recollecting that there are people who are fully enlightened and whose teachings are still with us. That's the Dhamma. And their representatives, the Sangha, who give their lives to trying to practice in the way that the Buddha taught, are still here today. And it's very inspiring to me that even a noble person, and perhaps especially a noble person, would recollect in this way fairly frequently. Because it's not the case that faith is only needed in the beginning, and that once faith has served its purpose, then wisdom keeps developing and the faith kind of diminishes in comparison. Actually, faith and wisdom arise together, and you can have as much of either as you could possibly wish for. It's not that you need to keep them somehow in check with each other. If it's really faith stemming from wisdom, then that faith is immense. It's unshakable for a stream winner. And it can be a source of immense joy. To us, it might seem like, okay, so these are the qualities of the Buddha. Maybe I don't see them all in myself right now. But imagine if you'd woken to see what the Buddha saw, and you actually knew this to be true and could recognize those qualities in one's own heart. Imagine the faith and the joy that would arise right there. And I think to some extent we can see that in ourselves and certainly in one another. Sometimes it's more easy to see it in other people than to see it in ourselves. So there's a lot to unpack here, because we could actually go through some of these descriptions of the Buddha, of the Dhamma, and of the Sangha. And for anyone who's used to chanting, you might recognize it as the Itipiso Bhagava Arahan Samma Sambuddha. Yeah, Vicha Charana Sampanno Sugato Lokadvidu. So this is what we chant sometimes day and night in some monasteries. Not so much at Anukampa yet, but I'm sure we'll get into the chanting more as we continue. And the same with the Dhamma and the Sangha. It's that classic chant that we do almost daily in some monasteries. And then, as well as these, we have these other three practices. And two of them, I think, for myself anyway, are quite familiar. I still don't do them as much as I could. But it really is a training to start to be able to look toward our own virtue, our own goodness, our own ethical conduct, and feel some amount of happiness around that, rather than constantly looking for the faults, constantly saying, yeah, but I did make a mistake today. I did speak a little bit sharply to somebody, or I got irritated. What about your general virtue? All the times that you spoke with kindness, that you said something that at least attempted to be encouraging or helpful or empathetic to another person. All the times you restrained yourself, you didn't lie, you didn't sort of knowingly waste somebody's time by speaking all kinds of useless things, but you actually, used your body, used your speech, even used your mind in ways that can engender a sense of harmlessness, a sense of care, and really uplift your own mind, uplift your own heart. And also recollecting one's own generosity. I find the language here incredibly beautiful. Dwelling at home with a mind devoid of the stain of stinginess. Just this, the practice of generosity can be the foundation for the path. There's another very common summary of the whole path, which is Dana, Sila, Bhavana, which basically means generosity, virtue, and cultivation of the mind. So generosity, of course, accomplishes the generosity, but by bringing it up in our mind, we cultivate the rest as well. We're using our mind in an ethical way, and we're also cultivating our mind, developing wholesome states and bringing gladness to the mind that we can then put into our meditation. And the last one was the devas, the beings in various heavenly realms. And the point here, although I don't practice this very much, but I think the point of this is to really help us to take heart that, those devas would have had qualities similar to us. We also have faith and moral discipline, it says here. I prefer kind of moral conduct or ethical behavior, virtuous behavior, learning, generosity, and wisdom. And it was because of those qualities that the devas were reborn in the deva realm. So I don't know if any of you here aspire to that. Of course, when we are in contact with the Buddha's teachings, we have more potential to go beyond the deva realm and actually break through to stream winning. And who knows, why not go as far as you can, go all the way to full enlightenment. But I do know people who are dead set on kind of taking rebirth in the Deva realm. And it's not a bad goal, because Devas can still hear the Dhamma. It is said that it's better to take a human birth. I think that's most commonly understood by most practicing Buddhists, because the amount of suffering and happiness in the human realm is a little bit more evenly split. Sometimes there's a lot more suffering than happiness at certain times in our life, or if we live in certain places, we're going through certain situations, maybe war or famine or, environmental catastrophe, etc. Sometimes it may seem that there's so much suffering here, but there is some happiness too. And at other times, of course, there can be so much, we can feel almost blessed. It's like all the blessings of life are with us. We sometimes forget and become a bit complacent. And it's almost as though it takes a sickness or it takes a kind of burnout or a loss of some kind for us to realize, no, actually, this is still samsara. We're still not safe, Or we've just moved into a new monastery and feel so much joy on returning. Beautiful place with light and space and good energy. And then the hot water doesn't work. And the heaviness of that on the person's shoulders who's responsible. No names needed. Yeah, so we're reminded, that this human realm is a good old mix. And that can be a very good place to practice. But still, we can get delight in thinking about devas, good beings that are there, through their own virtue and wisdom. So there's a lot to this, actually, in terms of understanding each of the contemplations and perhaps how we may practice them ourselves. And also as a meditation method, that when we sit down on the cushion, perhaps we don't go straight to the breath, but first we practice in ways, reflect in ways that brings up a certain amount of joy in the mind, and that makes it much, much easier to then let go a little bit. It's almost like we're directing the mind in the right sort of way, and then we're able to let go, relax, just trust the mind, trust the breath to arise when it will, trust the mind to settle in its own time. And because our mind is straight, in other words, it's been aimed in a straight direction. It's free from the coarser defilements of greed, hate, and delusion at that time. This sequence becomes quite natural. So I will stop because the point of this is to have some discussion, and I can see some questions coming in the box. So I will begin with some of the questions that are more descriptive so that you understand what it's actually talking about first. And then we can get into some discussion about practice and any terminology, actually. If there's any other terminology also that needs clarification at this stage, please write it in the chat or raise your hand if it's a bigger question. So yes, the first very important question is, who are the 8 types of individuals? And that was in connection with the Dhamma, the Sangha. So that sort of came in after saying who the Sangha are. It then said that is the 4 persons, the 8 kinds of individuals. So the 8 kinds are basically the person on the path to stream winning and the stream winner. The person on the path to once returning and the once returner, the Sakadagami. The person on the path to non-returning, Anagami, and the Anagami. And the person on the path to full awakening, Arahant, the 4th stage of enlightenment, and the Arahant. So sometimes I don't know if it's in the commentaries or in the Abhidhamma, it's probably in the suttas itself. It's called the path and the fruit. So when you're on the path, it's a sort of path, a stage of the path. But this is a kind of ambiguous stage. And it's not always easy to know, especially for the stream winner who is on the path to stream winning. So someone who is on the path to stream winning, it's said that they are destined, they're bound. They have to actually experience the fruit of stream winning. So as a breakthrough, as an event that happens in the mind and shifts the view permanently in this life, or when they die, as at the time of death. So that's the only time you can really know for sure that you were on the path. And the Buddha said there are 2 kinds of ways of being on the path. One is the sadhanusari, which means the faith follower, and one who is the dhammanusari, which means the person who's, in a sense, the wisdom follower, who's understood the Dhamma. So their understanding is very strong, and that keeps them on the path. But some people are much more faith predominant. Their understanding hasn't been clarified yet, but they have such incredible faith that they're going to keep practicing. So the trick to being on the path is really to keep on that eightfold path, or at least to keep coming back to it again and again and again. And as long as you do that, then stream winning is going to happen, eventually. Perhaps not in this life, if you're not always on the path, but certainly eventually. So I hope that helps. The last 6 pairs of the one on the path to once returning, one on the path to anagami, and the subsequent fruits are much clearer in a sense, except actually for the once returner, that isn't always obvious because no more fetters are removed. So with the stream winner, certain fetters are removed, such as the view of self, any kind of belief that rites and rituals can take you to enlightenment on their own. And what's the other one? Isn't it just the faith? Faith in the Buddha? I forget now because I'm jet lagged. I think it's just the faith becomes unshakable with stream winning. But then in the next, because greed, hate, and delusion haven't been uprooted yet, the next stage is more difficult to distinguish because there's just a weakening of those things. So of course there's a weakening in all of us, right? We hope. But until we're actually at the third stage, that greed and hate will still be there. Aversion and craving, if you prefer, will still be there. And it's only with the anagami, that's the third stage of enlightenment, that those 2 things are overcome. So that is in brief. Because, I don't really want to go into too much more detail so that we can talk about the sutta as a whole. So the other message in the chat, there's 2 more now. Wondering about generosity and reciprocity. So I am guessing that this one is related to recollection of one's generosity. Wondering about generosity and reciprocity. Yes, I'm not quite sure exactly what you're wondering about here. I think just, speaking what comes to mind, true generosity isn't too concerned with reciprocity. But it does seem to be the case that the more generous we are, the more that will elicit generosity in others because it seems to feel good. It feels good, right? And we learn by what feels good to us. So if somebody's very generous, then it encourages us sometimes to ask ourselves, can I be more generous too? It's really inspiring if another person is that way to me, especially if maybe they're generous, not necessarily financially or materially, but maybe they're generous in the way they think about you, the way they forgive you, and then you think, I could be more generous to them too. Why do I judge them when they're so forgiving of me? So I think it's wonderful to set an example, but true generosity is more concerned with giving without expecting anything in return. But yeah, please do raise your hand and we can have much more chat about that as well. So recollection of past lives will tell one where they were on the path. For me at least, faith that these are the Buddha's teachings and not mine set forth the stream of awakening. Yeah, thank you very much. Maybe that's true. And Shirley says, Devanusati seems to be rarely spoken about, but people might be interested that the monks at Clear Mountain recently gave a talk on this, which is on YouTube. Excellent. And there's also a guided meditation that's in the link. For the final recollection, we have devas or deities in English translation. Are all devas good, or are there also negative devas? It seems we are only to recollect the good devas who are on the path. Right, and do remember that the devas are not necessarily enlightened, right? So the devas still might have quite a bit of greed, hate, and delusion, but at this moment, as they've been reborn, their good karma has come to fruition. So generally speaking, they're in a very happy place, in a very happy state, and mostly they are concerned with that happiness. But they don't always live so peacefully. There are kind of battles between the devas and is it the asuras that sometimes have battles? And there are also, like Mara is a deva, actually. Mara is from the Paranimitta Vasavati realm, which is one of the higher deva realms, which is concerned with controlling other people's creations. So there are gods who create, and then there are gods above that who control other people's creations. And in a sense, that's what Mara is doing, right? When Mara kind of comes along and gets involved in our meditation, he's trying to control it. So we don't want to take refuge in devas, certainly. But I think the point of the Devanusati is to, and if that feels helpful for you, it's to think of good devas. It's to think of beings who are happy, beings who want to protect, beings who can sometimes help us if we really need them to. Or perhaps beings, I like to think of some of my friends who had deva-like qualities and who seemed to be, inclined that way as being up there in the deva realms. And maybe I can speak to them, maybe I can connect with them, I can, share merits with them. But I think for people who are on the path practicing the Buddha's teachings, I mean, we also have something to share with them too. So maybe that's one of the reasons I'm a little bit ambiguous about it, not too used to practicing it. The one way I did practice it in Myanmar was to have a sense of gratitude and respect for the invisible beings that might be around me at any given time, especially when entering a quiet place, maybe a cave, maybe the root of a tree, maybe a new kuti, something like this. And actually, when my teacher created our monastery in Myanmar, there were things like diggers involved. He kind of had this incredible vision for how to transform the piece of land, which was flat and very arid, into a forest with trees, with little hills, and with lakes and ponds. And so earth was moved. I don't know that any trees were actually taken down. I think he probably planted more than he removed, because it was mostly banana trees, which are very quick anyway. But he used to say, and he could, see and hear and even smell devas, and would talk about that quite openly. He used to say that they were a bit disturbed by this, and sometimes they weren't quite sure what our intention was. So he used to send them a lot of metta and reassure them that, we were here to practice, we were virtuous people, we were just visitors, and we were very respectful of their presence there, and that we only meant them well. And so he advised me to do the same whenever I went into a new place. And I thought that was really lovely, because it brought up lovely qualities in my mind. So for me, it's not so much the point as to whether there are devas, what kind of devas, or whether they can hear me, whether they really exist, or any of that, but more what brings a sense of gladness, what brings a sense of inspiration, or maybe respect, gratitude, etc. So yeah. I mean, most devas are not stream winners, okay, but there might be some devas who are, like Saka. He was the, I think, king of the devas, and I think he was a stream winner. So there are some, benevolent devas, yeah. And people at Ajahn Brahm also sometimes call on the devas occasionally, but you can't exploit them. You can't be doing it every day, and only for good reason, when it's things that are going to benefit many people. So, for example, he seemed to avert a massive weather storm one day on I think it was the 30th or 20th anniversary of the Buddhist Society, and there was a massive thunderstorm, floods everywhere, and everyone was telling him, you must call it off. And he just said, no way, and really chanted, really sent metta to the devas, asked for their help, asked for their protection. And just at the moment that the ceremony started, the clouds parted only in that part of the city. And all around it was raining, and they just couldn't believe it. So the people that were there at the time, I think there were TV crews there, with cameras, and they were just like, who is this person? Can he tell us the lottery numbers? Who is this Ajahn Brahm? So it can sometimes work. Okay. Any comments, questions, practice discussion that would be helpful at this point from people in the room? Or any parts that you would like me to explain? Okay, so we do have another comment in the chat, but I want to get you speaking because I'm hearing my own voice so much. So I'll come to the chat, and then I think Diana had a hand up very briefly. Great, I'll come to you after that. Is Mara a figurative character, or is he really responsible for some of the more negative states we get? And would Mara have taken rebirth by now as some other being in a different realm? Great question. Yeah, I think for the most time we do talk about Mara as a kind of personification, if you like, of negative psychological states. So sometimes if, say, voices come in our mind that, maybe have been conditioned into us, such as, you can't do this, you never get anything right, this is hopeless, it's never going to happen to me. You can say, Mara, I know you. You can recognize this as not the Dhamma, right? It is not the Dhamma. What it is, who it is, where it comes from, but it's not helpful at this time. So we can say, Mara, I know you. And as soon as you recognize that, sometimes that particular way of thinking or, unwholesome state that's not helpful in any way vanishes. So, but then again, Mara is in the suttas, and Mara also used to come and visit the Buddha quite frequently, and even after his enlightenment, believe it or not. So who knows? I mean, I tend to think it could be the case that there's something like Mara in these realms. And apparently, it is a kind of cosmic position, if you like, that there is sort of a station or a post in the kind of cosmos. I mean, I suppose there's many that we can't even conceive of too. It's indefinite or infinite. But there's a kind of Mara position. So it may well be that it's a different person each time fulfilling that post. So don't be reborn as Mara, okay? You don't want that one. Because Mara is the one that thinks that they are sort of invincible and the overriding God because they see so many other beings being born, passing away, and they are able to influence them. So they actually start to think that they're creating them. So there's a lot of delusion involved in the world of Mara. Yeah, so could have taken rebirth by now. I don't know. I mean, the thing is, those realms are very long lasting. So he could be there for very many eons. And I don't remember the numbers, but eons are a hell of a long time. Longer than many, 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 many hundreds of thousands of probably millions of our lifetimes. So don't get stuck there. I think it's also, one of the reasons I don't particularly advise people aspiring to rebirth in the Deva realms. I mean, if you're a good person, it might happen, but better to practice for insight, for awakening. Okay, so I did say I'll come to Diana now, and then I'll come back to the chat. Hi, Diana.
Hi, Venerable Canda. Gosh, I have so much I could say about what you just said about Mara, but the reason I raised my hand was just something that popped out to me. Different things will pop out at us at different times when we read them. And the first was that this instruction or this meditations that are being discussed in this sutta are in answer to the question of what does a noble disciple do once they've reached the fruit.
Correct.
And understand instructions, which is that stream winner or fully
yes.
Just stream winner? Okay.
I think that's stream winner, yeah, because it's saying that on that occasion the mind is not obsessed by lust, hatred, or delusion, and it's saying a noble disciple. So I think that's any one of the 4 categories. Okay. Or 8 categories, yeah.
And then what popped out at me in the ... section, and I appreciate you reading that because I think it's important too, and we don't want to skip over it.
Yeah.
Was the part that said, and I'm looking at a different translation from Bhikkhu Sujato. This is called a noble disciple who lives in balance among people who are unbalanced and lives untroubled among people who are troubled.
Mm.
And to me, that so describes our time. So in addition to just the reminder that it's always been hard times on planet Earth, there's always been people unbalanced and troubled. You know, there's hope for us to live a peaceful life, even in troubled times.
Yeah,
I want to speak
wonderful.
a little, yeah.
Yeah, thanks for bringing that out. That struck me too as we read through it, actually, that isn't that inspiring to know that this can be, in a sense, a protection for us to dwell. Yeah. What was it? That was untroubled and balanced, is that right? In the
Yeah.
other translation. So yeah, to dwell evenly or to dwell balanced. I like balance because it's more about the mind. It's like we dwell with a balanced mind. To dwell evenly, I don't know if we really use that kind of language, but yeah, I guess you could also say with equanimity, right? Or with a certain level-headedness, and who dwells without affliction without affliction or untroubled in a troubled population. Beautiful. I mean, we can really add whatever adjectives we want to here, just to make it real for us. And I think it gives a lot of hope because the Buddha, again, is not saying you've got to find utopia in order to practice, right? He's actually saying that practice has to happen right in the middle of the storm. And perhaps that is where it happens. Perhaps that's where there's the incentive for it to happen, and why this human birth is a particularly useful birth to have. So, yeah, thanks for pointing that out. And even coming to this sutta discussion, I think for me anyway, helps me to feel that, yeah, I've got a foothold, on like there's somewhere for me to be. There's a group of people for me to be with who are attempting to lift themselves, attempting to, steady their minds and maintain that inner balance. Because it is very different coming to the ordinary lay world. It's very, very different for me coming from Perth and now, out of a Buddhist community into the usual dynamics that happen, in normal life, so-called normal life. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to come to one more in the chat. I think that's really to read, but it says, okay, there was a very good talk explaining a bit more about Mara on Venerable Pekka's last Sunday talk. So that's Venerable Pekka's talk. She referred to a wonderful satirical book called A Letter from Mara. You can read it online by Venerable Punadhammo. Okay. And then I'll come to Christine.
Hi. So, following up on what you were discussing with Diana, if these 6 recollections occur to a stream winner, then for others who are not, this would seem like a tall order and almost overwhelming, actually, to be honest. So, for the short term, how could one use these 6 recollections in a way that it's not overwhelming? I mean, I can relate, for instance, to the one about generosity, because that seems to be the most practical for me personally. But yeah, there are five others. So I'm curious how to actually translate this into a more practical way, especially to our contemporary times.
Great. Thank you for that question. And just to reassure you that it's true that we're talking here about how a noble disciple often dwells, but it doesn't mean it does mean that it's coming naturally for that person and they dwell that way because it gives them gladness, right? And that might be more spontaneous for them. It may be more easy to rouse, for sure. But it isn't an advanced practice necessarily. I mean, noble people practice the same way that we do. I think that's one of the messages. They still also practice mindfulness. They still also practice anapana. They practice metta. They practice the Brahma Viharas. So in a sense, this is actually, a prerequisite for, or like a preliminary to mindfulness practice. So it's something we can do at any time. We don't have to be in deep meditation for this. We can just change the pattern of our thinking during the day, even a little bit in this direction. So firstly, you don't have to sit down and get fully absorbed into it. And it doesn't have to be for like a whole meditation session. I think it's just something that can help us just lift the mind, just point the mind in a wholesome direction before we start with our mindfulness practice. And you asked how to make a start, and I think you answered it perfectly for yourself. You then went on to say which one inspires you, and that is exactly where I would start. I would start at something that speaks to me and that feels natural, that feels gladdening. And in a way, that's why it's nice to read through them, because there'll be some you connect with more than others. And that'll change, from time to time. Just to show you how creative you can be, there is a meditation that Ajahn Brahm does, which he calls his Buddhanusati meditation, his recollection of the Buddha. And it's literally sitting to meditate and imagining you are the Buddha and just connecting with some of what you think a Buddha is, what a Buddha means to you. So you sit down with your eyes closed. You can even imagine that you've been recently enlightened. You're sitting under a river or under a tree, and the whole world looks new. And you have this beautiful sense of contentment, deep contentment and peace, something you could never even imagine was possible for you before, an undescribable peace and contentment. And you can really just get into this kind of, in a way, inner dialogue that you can have with yourself, conjuring up how it might feel to be a Buddha, like really embodying what a Buddha means to you. And if some of the language helps, that's wonderful, that a Buddha is fully enlightened, an arahat, accomplished in true knowledge and conduct, knower of the world. Like his knowledge was so vast, but he taught the Four Noble Truths. We can think about his teachings, any aspect of the teachings that resonates for us. So when we sit down to meditate again, or at other times of the day, you can recollect some of the teachings. Whatever makes sense to you. Maybe you get inspired by hearing the Four Noble Truths, or maybe you get inspired by the idea of right speech, or by compassion, by, I don't know, by joy, by non-stinginess, by generosity. So bring up anything that it resonates for you. Whether it's even a thought throughout the day or actually at the beginning of your meditation sitting. I would say that's what I tend to do. And if the generosity works for you, try it. Try to bring up times that you've been generous and what it felt like. But try and make it embodied, so you're actually going back to that context, back to that situation. You're remembering, for example, the smile on another person's face, or the kind of freedom that you might have felt inside yourself when you gave something away or opened up in some way, that brought you out of contraction, that made you feel, a sense of abundance, a sense of lightness, a sense of generosity. Yeah. So bring these things up for yourself. I hope that helps a bit, but I'd love to hear from anyone else who wants to share how they practice these, because this is really the point. So maybe I'll come to Suzanne, but if anyone else would like to share how any of these practices may or may not have helped them, or how you might do it, that would be wonderful. There are a lot of suggestions in the chat, but I would definitely suggest talking together today. You can look online anytime, but let's glean some of the wisdom here. So, Suzanne.
Yeah, hello everyone, and hello Venerable Canda. I'm glad you're back.
Thank you.
I was very touched by the part where it says it's kind of balanced in good times and untroubled in troubled times. It really struck me. When Diana, no, it was somebody else was talking about this. I was remembering a couple days ago, I was in Magdeburg. There was this attack at the Christmas market, and my parents live close by, and I was here in the area, and I went with a friend and my son to the sermon at the church the day after, and it was interesting experience, because in the sermon I was feeling really so much love and I was feeling what I experienced was there was the people who died were there, and they were like, there was so much love, and they were like saying it's okay, we're it's all right, there's something else than this experience here in this world, and you don't have to, don't worry. And it was so strong.
Beautiful.
And it really touched me. And so I kind of like, maybe that's, when there is terrible things happening in the world, maybe there's a possibility of a different perspective of it.
Yeah.
That we can have, that makes it, just in this moment I was feeling, I mean, obviously I didn't lose anybody in this attack. That would be totally a different thing, but it was kind of beautiful, you know. It
Yeah, the kind of total antithesis in a sense to, yeah,
Can you say that again?
the opposite to the attack, like the opposite emotion, actually.
Yeah, it was the opposite
What you
emotion.
would expect. Yeah.
There was total destruction, and on the other side there's love and just the peace of the soul. When we leave the body, I mean, I don't know, what some people might go to different realms where they might suffer again, but I think there must be some in a transition where you don't have that body for a few days, maybe, when a lot of people feel, I think, there's just bliss.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I was with someone who was dying recently, and they could already intuit that, they could, even though I don't know if they'd experienced that in meditation before, but they had been a practitioner. And as it came into the last sort of weeks of their life, they could start to feel that the mental or the emotional, the spiritual world really, just felt so much more real and so much more present to them than the physical world. It was like the stuff of the body, even talking about their life and the mundane things that happen in the world was of no interest. They only wanted to talk about their mind and the kind of emotions and qualities that they were starting to really see very sort of just very clearly. And it was so lovely because they were saying that, whoever walked in the door, they were in a hospice, they just automatically felt this sense of overwhelming love and gratitude towards them, no matter who they were. And they said, oh, it's funny, I don't know why, because I'm not intentionally practicing it. And I said, well, it's the practice you've been doing your whole life. It's the qualities of your heart that are just becoming so much more predominant now that the body is shutting down. So I do think there is this in between place before we get into a new body. And perhaps if we do get into a sort of much more refined body in the Deva realm, or even in the Arupa realms. I mean, if you've been practicing jhanas, or if you've been practicing the Arupa states, then you might get an incredibly fine material body or no material body. So yeah, then the qualities of the mind will be very predominant. And in a sense, that's what we're trying to do in our practice. So here we're bringing up those qualities of the mind right in the beginning. But it's beautiful when it happens spontaneously, isn't it? It gives us a lot of faith. And I think also, just to come back to the experience you shared, that is also something you can bring up and recollect in your practice, because it's been shown, I think, in neuroscience that the memory of love or of peace or of anything that has happened in our life is so close to the actual experience, the brain sometimes can't tell the difference. So it's very interesting. If you bring those feelings up again, imagine that sense of love that you were dwelling in at that time, and maybe the contrast to the cruelty and destruction that went before it. That can be a source of inspiration to direct your mind.
Yeah, it will stay with me.
Beautiful. Yeah. I'll come to Shirley.
Sorry, I couldn't find my cursor to unmute. Thank you, Diane, Suzanne. That was very beautiful, very touching. And I just wanted to say something as a rather different response to your experience about that tragedy in Magdeburg, which is such a lovely city. I went there. I liked it. I enjoyed that place. And when something tragic happens to a place you've been in it, you feel it. It's the response to, I think it's these 6 or certainly 5 of the reflections, response to the suffering and the awful, not so much the suffering, but the bad things that go on in the world, which in a way hurt more than the suffering. When people do cruel and wrong things, like that maniac who drove into that crowd at the Christmas market, and all the other terrible conflicts going on. But this is a reflection on goodness, the goodness of the Buddha, the goodness of the Sangha, our own goodness, and the goodness of Devas, who, whether we believe in them or not, if there are no Devas in the Deva world, there are certainly Devas in this world, or people who are probably just a bit messed up and chaotic like all of us, but do some Deva-like things. And I mean, we're all, in a way, I've been reflecting, we're all, in a way, in the Deva world now, just by coming here doing Deva-like things. And it's just these, I think the way I try to use these exercises is to just dwell on the goodness, which is an antidote to dwelling on the bad things that are going on in the world. And I still think there is more kindness and generosity than there is cruelty and meanness in ordinary people. I think it's a natural state of the world. So I find that very, very helpful to just focus on this goodness. And focusing on one's own goodness can be very, very difficult. I mean, the first time I was invited to do this meditation many, many years ago, all that came up in my mind was a litany of self-hatred. I couldn't think of a single good thing I'd done. And then I just thought, Shirley, you can be quite reliable. You can do this. So, but with practice, it does come. You do remember you've done some quite nice, kind things, in generous things in one's life. So and try and remember specific things one's done that, and it's an antidote, really. That's how I find this reflections. Just an antidote to the constant horribleness that we see on the news and in the media. So that's just what I'd like to.
Thank you. Yeah, and how necessary is it to, bring up an antidote to that? Because it is only bad news, pretty much, that's reported. I mean, you don't hear about the, however many 8 and 7/8 of the world's population who are living peacefully. Billion, that is. 8.98 billion or something. I don't know. It's a lot more people living in peace and harmony than people harming one another. And so, not to at all undermine the harm that's happening, because, of course, harm is devastating. And sometimes peace we take for granted, right? I mean, it is a natural human need. But you're right, actually, that in a sense, this is a practice of mudita. It's a practice that can contrast with, the suffering in the world. And if you look at some of the language, it's about inspiration. It's about gladness and rapture. So these are words, especially inspiration and gladness, that are, in a way, translations of mudita, right? So yeah, definitely. Any last comment, or anyone would like to share anything about this? I mean, one area that's very interesting to me is the reflecting on one's own conduct, because it's just such a huge area to exploit. I mean, we do beautiful things, or we abstain from unwholesome things with our body, speech, and mind throughout the day, like almost the whole time, actually, if you think about it. I mean, this whole hour or so, you've probably had far, far more Dhamma-aligned thoughts than unaligned thoughts. And just by being here, you're doing something wholesome. You're using your speech in a skillful way. And I feel that we don't really exploit it enough. I remember years ago when Venerable said, don't you sit down and, and reflect at the end of the day? You're doing so much good stuff. She said, what a waste. She couldn't believe I didn't do that regularly. So I think there's a lot of happiness on offer that we just don't realize is there. Manori.
Yeah, I thought of sharing what I started doing because, like Shirley, it's very difficult to kind of, own any good things that you do. And I started writing, and then I read it and said, did I write too much? Is it really And it took me a bit of time to get used to, that what I wrote was true, and that I should be happy about it, kind of. So I've kind of written now for about 3 years, right? Like anything that not every day, but maybe once a month, or anything that kind of inspires me, I would write. And first, I didn't even want to look at it. Like I was a bit ashamed that I wanted to be happy with what something I had done, but then I slowly got kind of warmed about it. And then I started writing 3 things like that I'm grateful for just before sleeping, and made it a routine as well. So those things kind of helped me to be like, be a bit more comfortable of the positive things that I did.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yeah, it's transformative, actually, even these 3 things every day. If it's just small things you've done, it can be things you're grateful to yourself for as well. And it's not so much the point even whether it's true or it's not true. You're being kind to yourself by doing this. You're giving yourself encouragement. All good teachers know you need to encourage the students. So, if we're going to guide ourselves, we need to encourage ourselves. We need to recognize the goodness that's there. And that really helps it come out. So it's not an ego enhancing thing. I think this is one of the problems with this sort of practice, because most of us have some sense of self, however refined it might be or not. There is still this kind of, I'm not sure, isn't it about me? But it's not. Actually, it's about the results of actions. It's around noticing how these things feel. So not just, okay, I did this, but try and remember how it felt and actually feel some of the joy that was there in your mind. Like when they say in the suttas, when you give, you should reflect before giving, you should reflect during giving, and you should reflect after giving. So you're aware before you give a gift, I'm going to give a gift. I want to give a gift. How does that feel? It feels wonderful. Or when we do the chanting, I often say, get in touch with that intention to spread metta. There's something beautiful about just the intention. And then when you're doing it, try and remember this is something good that I'm doing. It's something that can be beneficial. And also afterwards. So yeah, make it a habit. Everything is a mental training. It's just a matter of practice. And whatever we frequently incline our mind to becomes our new behavior pattern. So please do that to counteract the amount of fault finding that you do towards yourself, mainly, most probably. And it helps with doing the same towards others too. So I think we're pretty much out of time. It's incredible. We didn't get too far with this, but on the other hand, well, it's just a big sutta, I suppose. On the other hand, there's a lot there. So I hope that this can encourage many of you to, remember that there is a more active practice that we can engage in. And it isn't like a list, right? I wanted to say that also to the person who raised the fact that it might seem a bit overwhelming. It isn't a list of things you have to do. It's more like you could try this, or if this doesn't work, try this, or maybe try this. So the Buddha's always giving us many, many different ways to practice the Dhamma, because everybody's different and the mind is different at different times. But still, having heard this, you might pick something up that can be helpful for you at some point. So very good. Thank you for being here. I'll just read the comment that Manori wrote in there. I think you have probably all read it, but she said that there was another talk on Buddhanusati, and she used Bhagava Arahant, Samma Sambuddha, which are the first three qualities of the Buddha. Blessed, enlightened, and fully self-enlightened, if you want. And asked us to imagine a Buddha statue. So just to bring up the image of a Buddha. So it depends, again, if that means something to you. If a person is from, I actually wonder if this was Venerable Terika. I'm suspecting it well could have been. No? Okay. But the story of Venerable Terika, which she told me, I met her just recently in Perth, which was fantastic because she's been teaching on these programs. She's full of metta, full of joy. And she actually told the story of how she came to ordain. And she went to the temple one day. I think she was taken by her parents because they wanted to meet some aunties. And I'm not sure they were blood aunties, because in Sri Lanka you have aunties. Everybody's auntie who's a certain age, right? And these two aunties happened to be nuns, Buddhist nuns. And she went to this temple and felt a great sense of peace and was fascinated by these aunties, these nuns. And when it was time for the meditation, she said, I want to meditate too, and went along with them and sat in front of a Buddha statue. And when she was sitting in front of that statue, she just had this sense of, this is where I'm meant to be. And such a lot of overwhelming faith arose in her mind that she opened her eyes to look at the Buddha, and she said she saw the Buddha blink, as though saying, come, daughter. And at that moment, she knew she wanted to ordain. And she even didn't want to leave the place. So she had to say to her parents, I just want to stay here with my aunties. Don't make me go. I think she was 16 at the time. And of course, they had to try and convince her to leave, but it wasn't easy. And then when she went home, she carried on saying, I want to go back. I want to be a nun. I don't want to live here anymore. I want to be a nun. And she cried and basically asked them for 6 days until they had to give in. Just like the story in the suttas, is it Ratapala? Or maybe not Ratapala. I forget his name. And he had to basically beg his parents, and he said, I'm not going to eat, I'm not going to drink until you let me ordain. And of course, at some point, their love for their son and their wish to keep him alive was stronger than their wish to keep him at home, so they had to let him go. It was a very similar story with her. So sometimes, a Buddha statue can be extremely powerful for some of us, depending on our conditioning. And if it isn't yet, it may well be the more you practice. So whatever works for you, really, whatever works for you. Okay, so Manoi, are you going to say a few words to end?
Yeah. So thank you very much for being part of the Anukampa community, first of all. And as you know, all this could be done just because there's a community building it up, and on the donations, big and small donations of all of you and all the other people that comes to Anukampa events and support Venerable Chanda's all this building up of Anukampa project. And I want to tell in the donations, so the donation is one of the ways of practicing generosity. And as you know, the Venerables don't handle money, and all those things are done that you can see is by your donations. So when you go to Anukampa Project, you will see two types of donations. One is from the normal bank transfer, and there is another way of PayPal donations as well. So I wanted to highlight that. And so you can give them one-off gifts or standing order as well. And these days, as you can see, Venerable has just come from Australia. And so regular shopping deliveries or shopping or supermarket vouchers, which are useful as well. So keep that in mind, and no amount is too small, and very gratefully received. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Manoi. What was I going to say? I guess now I've pinned myself. There we go. don't want to see myself on the big screen. I think tomorrow is the metta meditation on the website. Okay. I'm not even sure what I've signed up to do. Yeah, and then I will be back in the monastery probably on the 30th or so. So from then on, yeah, regular shopping deliveries are kind of one of the most essential things, because we're going to be obviously supporting quite a growing community. I think throughout most of the year, I have 5 or 6 and sometimes 7 guests at any given time. So we have quite a full house. And of course, there are other ways to be involved, like volunteering. I think at the moment, actually, we need more local folks, because there's all sorts of stuff that can go wrong with a house, or things that you can call in to do. So we might be having more busy bee days or things like that. But yeah, sometimes it's just good to have people who can come, because yeah, something's broken, or you never know what's going to happen next. Anyway, most of you are not living so close, but who knows in the future? Maybe you might consider coming to live in Oxford. Who knows? And we do still have some places, I think, on the day retreat with Bhante Sujato on the 1st of Feb. And for those who don't know, there's also an evening talk at Oxford Buddha Vihara on the 31st of January, Friday, the 31st of January. So thanks for putting the events up, Matthias. And I think that's all from me. So take care, everybody, and we can unmute you if you wish. You can wave goodbye. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu.